Hello and welcome to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. With the exception of a few minor violations, the Syrian ceasefire is holding. This has surprised many. What is next? A restart of some kind of peace process? Or, as some have suggested, is this time to pause and regroup? As things stand now, Damascus and Moscow have won an astounding victory. Will Washington let this stand? To Crosstalk, the ceasefire in Syria. I'm joined by my guest, Larry Johnson, in Washington. He is a managing partner for Berg Associates and a former CIA analyst and a U.S. State Department counterterrorism official. Also in Washington, we have Paulo von Schirach. He is a professor at BAU International University, as well as editor of the Schirach Report. And in London, we cross to Bill Law. He is a Middle East analyst. All right, gentlemen, Crosstalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want, and I very much appreciate it. Larry, if I can go to you first here. We're 4 days in. A lot of skeptics, even before the ceasefire went into effect, said this would never work. A lot of the opposition groups of all kinds of coloration said they would not even participate. But look, where we are, 4 days in. Are you optimistic that's going to remain this way? Go ahead.
Yes. The opposition groups were faced with the prospect of starving or being killed if they continued to take up arms or coming and reaching an accommodation. I think they realized that the chaos that has been inherent in the U.S. and British policy in trying to support opposition groups without a clear political strategy, they finally realized that they were on the short end of the stick. Meanwhile, from both the Syrian perspective, with the backing of Russia and Iran, we've seen a very, I'll call it a coherent, focused strategy. It's been very methodical about integrating both military as well as political dimensions, and it is paying dividends. So I think, this is sort of the best of all ceasefires because it allows the conflict to continue to go on in terms of eradicating al-Nusra and ISIS.
Okay, Paulo, what's your reading of the situation here? Because even as we speak, we have Saudi officials saying that they're preparing possible preparation for a land invasion of Syria. I mean, is this just empty rhetoric? Is it just to save face here, considering what they've been saying about the Damascus government over the past 5 years? What's your read?
I really think that they're bluffing, quite frankly. I don't really think that Saudi Arabia is in a position right now, given other things that are going on, including their own domestic problems and the conflict in Yemen, to launch an all-out attack against Assad in Syria, knowing full well two things: that Syria is protected by Russia to begin with, and of course by Iran and Hezbollah, and most of all, that the United States is going to sit this one out. I don't see any scenario in which the United States would, if things go bad, if things go south regarding the ceasefire, that the United States would say, okay, all bets are off, and therefore we're going to do something. With what? The United States has no assets on the ground and no prayer of rallying, even domestically here in Washington, D.C., the political support for starting a new conflict in Syria. Therefore, I think that the Saudis, even though they clearly have manifested their own displeasure, and they really think this is a bad idea and that it's not going to hold, and that this will be an excuse to pound the pro-Western rebels, that they're actually going to do anything about it.
Okay, Bill, I wish I could be as optimistic, because looking at some of the rhetoric coming out of the House of Power in Washington, there are plenty of people that want to see Russia make a mistake or alleged mistake or some kind of false flag. There are a lot of discontented people in Washington about this, because you know what? It's not a story that was written in Washington. It's being written in other capitals, and that makes a lot of people uneasy, even angry in Washington.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point, Peter. I think that there is unease. Certainly there's unease here in London as well, that the U.S. is not leading this by any stretch of the imagination, and that it is Russia's game to play. But they have both committed, and I think that's a point that needs to be made. They both have a stake in this ceasefire holding. And I think from the perspective of the people of Syria, who have suffered inordinately from every side, that the longer this ceasefire holds, the better the opportunity. And I would applaud the Russians for their efforts, but equally, I don't want to denigrate John Kerry. John Kerry put a lot of pressure on the Saudis and the Turks. Don't get silly. Don't make any moves. just back off. And they listened to him. So he is playing a role here, and I don't think that should be diminished.
You know, and Larry, if I can go to you, I have to, I have to give credit where credit's due, and I agree with Bill there, because apparently, from what I've been told, is that Barack Obama has just removed himself completely from this situation here. Maybe he's got a lot of golf games in the last few months of his presidency, but it really does look like that Kerry's leading. What bothers me is that he's so alone. I mean, he's surrounded by a lot of people that do not want to see a successful outcome, meaning a successful outcome that doesn't involve U.S. policy decision-making. So, again, one has to be cautious. Go ahead, Larry.
Well, Barack Obama's solitude is self-imposed. There is a sharp division within the administration. On the one hand, you have Defense Secretary Ash Carter, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs Joe Dunford, and I'm told that John Brennan at CIA were pushing for not going along with the ceasefire. But I think Kerry, it wasn't so much a stroke of genius, because the reality is, without U.S. financial support, without the support of the CIA through covert lines of communication, that these opposition groups have no foundation for continuing, and Turkey and Saudi Arabia certainly are not going to put themselves out front to be the primary target. So Kerry wisely went along with this deal. But it certainly underscores that there is a complete chaos on the U.S. side. There may be frustration and outrage over what we see as Russian leadership, but it's just the de facto situation.
Paulo, if I go back to you in Washington also. Go ahead, jump in. That's the point of the program. Go right ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, yeah, I fully agree. And certainly the fact that the United States has, for years, I mean, this conflict in Syria, as we all know, started in 2011. There was an opportunity in which the United States could have led, with whatever possible outcomes, but there was an opportunity in which there were, still possibilities for the domestic opposition to do something with the U.S. and other countries' help. That window of opportunity came and went. Then we got ISIL, then we got al-Nusra, then we got all this huge, gigantic mess. The problem going ahead now, even though, much to everybody's surprise, the ceasefire is holding, and much better than probably, we would have forecasted even a few days ago, that the issue is this: what is the end game? Because the rebels can see the writing on the wall. The United States has now acquiesced de facto that Assad is going to stay. Is there a possibility down the line of some kind of political arrangement whereby, within Syria, I'm not talking about involving ISIL and the other bad guys, but between the government in Damascus and the pro-Western Saudi-backed opposition, can there be some kind of a deal? Right. This is really going to be very difficult.
Let's talk about that in a second here. I want to backtrack a little bit with something you said here. I mean, I want to go back to go to Bill here in London. Let's remind our viewers here that in 2012, there could have been a political transition deal that all sides could have agreed to, but the United States turned it down. Let's remember that, because it has pushed for forced regime change. And I still have my suspicions. I'm going to Bill here in London about that here, okay? I don't see the Americans, all of them, backtracking on that issue. They call it political transition now. They don't say Assad must go. So let's remember here, the problem over the last few years is the U.S. and its allies have not been fighting terrorists. They've been pushing for regime change, and during that process, all the ISIL and all these other groups flooded into the country. So the negligence of Western policymaking should be pointed out, and it should be called out very loud and clear. That's what I'm doing on this program here. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I mean, we have to say that Barack Obama was asleep at the switch in terms of Syria. There were opportunities, huge opportunities missed, and it's to the enormous damage of Syria and the Syrian people. And it is with great regret that we look at this situation now and think where Obama could have been with the Syria crisis and with other crises in the Middle East, and where he actually is. And I think, as Larry says, he basically hasn't stepped up to the plate and done what needed to be done. It's left allies here, the Brits, for example, perplexed as to what happens next.
But
Where do we go next with this
Bill, but one of the things that I
situation?
worry about, I worry about here is that, what would have been the alternative? Invade Syria? Boots on the ground in Syria? I mean, this is the great dilemma here.
Well,
I mean, doing too little or doing too much here, or maybe just focusing on what is legitimate and under international law recognized. I mean, that's the key issue here. Go ahead.
Doing too little, too much, but doing something. I mean, there was an opportunity. There was, before the terrorists seized the agenda, before the Islamists stepped into the vacuum, there was an opportunity to connect with liberal, secular, democratic people who were prepared to go into the streets and protest peacefully, and America held back. That's where I find it hard
I don't
to
know.
swallow.
I mean, America and its allies poured all this arms and money into it, okay? That's what I'm getting at here. Go ahead, Larry, jump in.
Not a lot.
Go ahead, Larry, jump in.
May I jump in?
Let me go to Larry first. Let me go to Larry first. Go ahead.
I applaud Bill for, you can tell that he's got a good heart, and there's an element of him that believes that people are following the rules here. But really what happened was, it started under George W. Bush, the funding of the opposition. When I talk about funding the opposition, I mean giving money and other organizational support to groups that opposed Bashar al-Assad. And it was strictly not because Assad was doing anything at the time that was so oppressive and so brutal, but simply because the United States decided we were going to engage with regime change.
Right.
That accelerated under Barack Obama. Barack Obama was not a passive observer here. In fact, he oversaw and approved the policy, and it was carried out. I am certain, as I read the press, this is not because I have inside knowledge, I've simply followed what's in the press, and quite clear that the United States dramatically increased its support to these opposition groups, including providing weapons and training. We started the fire there. It was not Bashar al-Assad's policies that initiated. That's been the propaganda spin from Washington. But in fact, we started that conflict.
Gentlemen, I
fully
have to jump in
expecting it to
here.
turn
We're
out
going to go
different.
to a short break, and after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on Syria. Stay with our team. Welcome back to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. To remind you, we're discussing the Syrian ceasefire agreement. Okay, just before we went to the break, Paolo, I noticed you wanted to jump in and react to something that was said, maybe Larry or myself. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to put this in a broader context. If we look back at the events of the beginning of the Arab Spring, which of course precede what happened in Syria, we see pretty much, I mean, a very similar script, even though the circumstances turn out to be completely different. But let's look what happened in Egypt. That there was this opposition, this spontaneous movement, all these young people, Tahrir Square, protesting against strongman Mubarak, and public opinion in the United States said, okay, we have got to do something. These are pro-democracy people. They are against authoritarianism, against corruption. We've got to be on their side, etc. And this became sort of the leitmotif. And look what happened in Egypt, a complete disaster. And in Syria, it was pretty much the same thing, with the difference that Assad enjoyed, not a very good profile in Washington, D.C. And so the notion that the United States, as has been pointed out by the other guests, could do something and be on the side of the good guys, seemed to be very appealing, that we want to be moral, we want to be good, etc. And look what happened. It unleashed a civil war, which allowed ISIL to inject itself and all the other things that we know about. Now it's all gone. Whatever the United States may still think, or the CIA or the Pentagon may still think, or by the way, the Saudis may still think that they can do to support the opposition, it's a done deal. I don't really see any scenario now with that Assad, with strong Russian and Iranian and Hezbollah support, is going to go away. He's not going to go away.
Well, I mean,
can there be some kind of a political deal?
And why should he go away? If that's the democratic choice of the Syrian people, that's their business.
Well, it's not democratic, Peter. Come on, it's not democratic. I mean, the fact of the matter is, this fire wasn't lit simply by the Americans. This fire was lit in the streets of Damascus and Tunis, in Cairo, in Bahrain. These were people who said, we've had enough of the dictators.
The empirical
We've
record
had enough
is,
of the dictators.
Fine. But there were peaceful protests and there were violent protests as well. There were people, police officers and people, the security forces and military were also killed during this. It happened simultaneously.
Of course they were, Peter, but by and large, when this began, it was a peaceful protest.
Let's keep in mind.
And the West sat back and let it be taken over by the violent.
But that's the whole point, Bill. That's the whole point, Bill. The more you inject from outside, the more you created this disaster.
Could
go
I
ahead,
interject?
Larry, jump in, and go ahead in Washington. Go ahead.
Bill, I agree with you that there were people in Syria, Syrians who opposed Bashar al-Assad, genuinely wanted to remove him. There's no doubt about that. But what was so cynical about what the United States did is we went to those groups, went to them with promises, both incited and helped escalate the conflict. And it was not just them. We were working in concert with the Saudis and the Turks, and the weapons that started flowing out of Libya into Turkey, ultimately reaching Syria. And in the process, here was the United States telling the world that we're fighting a war on terror, yet at the same time, we're actually helping arm al-Nusra and ISIS. And we look at Bashar al-Assad, he was a secular guy. He was not a sectarian religious figure. He didn't dictate that you had to adhere to one particular religious vision in order to be a part of Syria or a part of his government. And yet, the United States took it upon itself, had outside encouragement with the Brits, with the Saudis, with the Turks, to go in and help destabilize that and to replace it with what? Nobody ever asked the question, if we get rid of Assad, then what? It was simply, we're going to start this fight, and hopefully the democracy will
the fight
survive.
has begun earlier because Saddam Hussein was a secularist as well.
May I jump in? Remember, I'm going to go to Paolo in Washington. Remember, before all this started, Hillary Clinton called Assad a reformer. Go ahead, Paolo, in Washington. Go ahead.
Basically, I fully agree with what's just been said. The reality is that the United States didn't really have an end game. In other words, there was no strategic plan to say how do we envision the future of the Middle East? What's going on? What are the other dynamics at play here? Yeah. And this is why how the United States, and everybody knows this now in hindsight, was completely blindsided by the rise of ISIL. They just didn't see it coming at all. And therefore, I fully agree with Larry saying, we stirred the pot in Syria. This created a huge mess, which allowed the window of opportunity for ISIL to re-inject itself into the eastern part of the country. And then, lo and behold, of course, this is outside our conversation, but into Iraq. Yeah. And the United States said, what? We didn't know that. This was not supposed to happen. We had no idea. And now we got a bigger problem that in part has been unleashed by the amateurish way in which it was the insurrection, or if you want to call it that way, in Syria was supported a little bit, but not too much. Give them something to keep the fight going, but not enough to win. And now we are in a situation in which the rebels are now surrounded, and again, with the exception of Saudi Arabia, which seems to be openly upset about the ceasefire and saying it's not going to hold, and we're going to do this and we're going to do that.
Turkey is also
the United States is very quiet about all this.
Turkey is very upset.
Well, I agree with you, Carlo. There was no end game. There was no strategy laid out, and that's a huge dilemma.
Yes.
And
that's
I agree with you, too, that it's unlikely the Saudis are going to do anything. They're going to bluster and talk big, but nothing will happen on that front. But there is some good news here. I mean, after all, Shaddadi has fallen. That's a key town in the link between Raqqa and Mosul, and that's happened because of the SDF, which is a force of Kurds and rebel groups cobbled together, supported by American bombing, has just taken Shaddadi. Now, there is some positive out of this, and we should not forget that the war is being won on the ground in the east. Yeah?
Okay, Larry, Patrick Coburn wrote a very interesting piece. It's in the current edition of the London Review of Books, and it's titled End Times for the Caliphate. I mean, we've talked a lot about the Syrian government and outside forces. Let's talk about the caliphate here. I mean, do you see it coming to an end? It's certainly, I mean, when Kerry was talking about this partition thing last week, one was left with the assumption that there'd be a state for the caliphate, for ISIL. What's going on there? Because we keep focusing on these different issues, but the real problem has been all along these terrorist groups. Go ahead.
The caliphate's not going to collapse on its own. It's going to require a combination of both military action and a concerted effort to dry up the support that's been provided to ISIS, ISIL, Daesh, however you want to refer to them, by both the Turks and the Saudis. Now, what I don't understand is why we do not have a coherent global policy that would bring Great Britain, the United States, France, Russia, and China to the table to say, okay, look, the real threat that we need to address right now is this version of a radical Sunni extremism. It is pernicious. It has no right to exist in the modern world. And it is the source of 95% of the terrorism that's been going on. That particular ideology has driven over 95% of the terrorism in the last 10 years. You know, it's not like it was 30 years ago where we had, you know, communist-backed terrorism and nationalist-backed terrorism and had some Hezbollah. It is concentrated right now. And this is, to me, argues that we really have a common ground that we can come together on, and we're ignoring it right now up to this point.
Okay, Paulo, why doesn't that happen? Because I have my answer, and it's hubris in Washington.
Yeah.
Washington, it has to lead or it doesn't want to play. It takes the toy away from everyone and breaks it. I mean, I really find it amateurish, childish. You know, Mark Toner and his entire attitude in talking about this process here, I mean, it's so counterproductive. And for me, it's a reflection of the mindset of many people in Washington. Go ahead.
May I say, if I may add something to that, my impression is that Barack Obama is, in fact, it's a little bit of a different angle. Yes, there is a combination of hubris and amateurish behavior, meaning, yes, we know that this is a big problem, and what are we going to do about it? A little. Just compare. This comparison has been done a million times. Just look at the air war as the United States has conducted it against ISIL, leaving aside now the issues at hand about the Syria, Assad, the ceasefire, and whatnot. This has been pinpricks. If we look at the volume of bombings that were delivered during the Kosovo air campaign against Serbia, you know, many years ago, it's like 10-1, 20-1. The notion that you conduct a meaningful air war with 5, 6, 10 sorties a day, which means sometimes there is no weapons are discharged, or you discharged a weapon against one vehicle. This is the way you fight a war?
But
this is ridiculous.
Paulo, but why did this all change? You know, why did it all change? It all changed 20 weeks ago, if I can go to Bill in London. I mean, again, you know, Washington watched this problem grow out of control. I mean, now there seems to be evidence that they were waiting for Damascus to fall in October, and they were just going to stand by and watch a black flag go up. And then what happened? The Russians got involved and got serious and started bombing the hell out of these people. That's why we have a game changer now. Bill, I'm going to give you the last word here, 40 seconds. Go ahead.
You're right. The Russians are the game changer, and they have shown themselves to be aggressive and firm and clear in their policies, and they've made the difference, haven't they? The question now is, where do we go from here? I mean, I don't have the answer. I don't think anybody does at this stage. It's still a very, very dangerous time. Let us at least hope that the ceasefire holds for some time, so again, the people of Syria can get a bit of a break. Lord knows they need it.
Okay. Paulo, go ahead. We still got 30 seconds. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, look, yes, I fully agree. I think that the question, the real big question is it possible? In an ideal world, there should be some kind of reconciliation on the domestic front in Syria, and then all the wise people, and that should include Washington, should converge and really get together on the fight against Sunni extremism represented by ISIL and al-Nusra and all that. That requires some wisdom, which we haven't seen yet. The United States talk about the 65 countries coalition. This is a joke.
Right,
Nothing
Paulo,
has really happened.
Let's work on the wisdom part, gentlemen. Let's work on the wisdom part. We've run out of time here. Many thanks to my guests in Washington and in London. And thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time. And remember, Crosstalk rules. I love it.